in my hometown just recently, just as an example of this, um, the city council now is kind of looking at this new kind of zoning law. So they've watched the price of housing in my hometown just rip about 40% since kind of pre-pandemic levels. And they're looking at this, and in a vacuum that would make sense. It was like, okay, well, that's a housing supply problem. So housing's getting too expensive because we obviously have a supply problem. We need to increase the supply of housing. So they're looking at rezoning so that they can, take single family homes off the table and maybe be able to build multifamily dwellings or duplexes, et cetera, to try to increase the supply of housing. Meanwhile, if you look at the numbers of what's going on, um, housing has increased in price about 40% since pre-pandemic levels, but the population of the city has actually decreased by 2% over that same time frame. So it can't be a supply problem if the actual population has decreased, but we're so conditioned to just not look at the money as the problem. And the way I see this is, it's one thing for somebody at a cocktail party that has nothing to do with the actual city council or something like that to have just kind of a flippant, uneducated guess as to what's going on. But somebody that's actually tasked with understanding the problem and fixing the problem, if they're that far off target, it just shows you how conditioned we are to never look at the money as the problem. And we just, so even the people in charge of solving the problem don't see the problem. And I think that just kind of shows you how early we are. And I think that's kind of a parallel to the JP Morgan just waking up the debasement trade. These guys are monetary experts. They follow markets for a living. They're supposed to be out there telling other people how to manage their money. And even they don't see the money side of the equation. Like, it's just fascinating to see the experts not be as read in as just the rest of us in the Twitterverse that have just been following this money problem and cannot unsee it. It was like, for us, we see, like, when I looked at that housing supply problem and I look at the unaffordability of housing, the money slaps me in the face like a cold fish, but somehow the experts don't see it at all, which is just really interesting. Our leaders are unwilling to say that the money is the problem because that's the part of the equation that they're in charge of. So they're going to point to everything else as causing inflation except for their own mismanagement of the currency. They're obviously not going to point everyone to that, because then that once they admit that they see it, they're responsible for fixing it. So the way I also drives me crazy, because I come across that all the time as well. This idea that greedy corporations are what's making our life hard, is what's making inflation rip. And it's not that corporations aren't greedy. I don't think that argument could be made. And we're all kind of greedy if you consider greed just being kind of economically self-interested. I like to tell people, well, you might be willing to do whatever job you're doing. You may be willing to do that for a little less money, but you're not going to go in and tell your boss that. So does that make you greedy, that you'd be willing to maybe work for 10% less, but you're not going in and telling your boss? I was like, hey, boss, you're paying me too much. So, corporations are just like us. They're going to get as much as the market will bear for the product that they are selling. And that's just normal supply demand economic dynamics, that they will charge what the market will bear. And it's like there's an equilibrium point where if the price goes any higher than that, they'll sell you less units. So they're going to do just what every individual economic actor would do. I think the question is, okay, if this is greedy corporations, why is it increasing at an exponential rate? Because I think corporations have always been greedy. Corporations were greedy my entire life. They were greedy in the 50s, their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 10s, like to today. They've always been greedy. That's a constant linear thing that's always been the case.
If there's no monopoly, and in most markets there's not a monopoly outside of like governments and central bankings and like other things like that. So it is this argument is so simple. And I think it's like an easy answer for people. It's like, oh, of course they are greedy. Like, that's why in inflation, and it gives them like kind of an easy target. You can just like, oh yeah, greedy corporations, and they just want to make profits, and they're shareholders, and they're so evil. And then it's like, yeah, but like, have you looked at like what you just said? Like, is so amazing. It was like uh, did it just get it greedy in 2025?
Yeah,
Like,
right.
is it this the year where everyone just like, oh, I'm greedy now? Like, now they woke up and being greedy. It's like, this is completely nonsense. But I'm really curious what you say about that, because I feel like mainstream is kind of waking up to the idea that there's something wrong with the money. Um, I see it now actually with my friends that ask, actually friends that are not in Bitcoin are asking now more about like, oh, I heard this one guy on the internet telling us that the money might be broken. So, and I always like, oh, like who was that? And it's actually sometimes like not even Bitcoiners. So now this idea that the monetary system is broken gets spread actually quite fast, and outside of only Bitcoiners talking about that, which is kind of interesting for me to see. And then we have JP Morgan, as you said, like the debasement trade. We have a really big people that say it's just like, hey, like we need to have hard assets. And in the last 2 years, hard asset was the big winner, gold and Bitcoin. Everything else kind of lost. Jesse Myers like makes a great analysis on that. What happens actually right now when we have TradFi and Wall Street kind of waking up to that and telling also I mean, even Larry Fink talks about that, the flight to quality, which is crazy that he's on board with that. What happens in the next 5 years? Because it seems like the way mainstream actually is waking up to that reality.
And what they won't say out loud is they know that their monetary monopoly is breaking down. They know it's breaking down, and Bitcoin is the reason it's breaking down. And it's moving too fast for them to really control, and it's moving too fast. They're losing control in real time. So they feel this existential need to basically overarching in a non democratic fashion implement a central bank digital currency to try to maintain control. And to me, it just feels like a caged animal that has just run out of options and is just lashing out with this kind of agonal breath of trying to maintain their kind of authoritarian control over money. I think what's happening, the reason like the debasement trade, it's this kind of inevitability that this monetary contender has entered the arena and just has to be dealt with. And I think you've kind of seen this on every layer of the cake. You know, it's kind of just like individuals usually dismiss Bitcoin out of hand initially, and then kind of it becomes inevitable in their eyes, and then they bend the knee. And we're watching kind of that middle layer of kind of the corporate financial world. They also tried to dismiss it out of hand initially. All these people that are finally coming around to the debasement trade were the same people that were telling you that it wasn't a problem, you know, just a handful of years ago, and we're basically telling you that Bitcoin was BS or Bitcoin was a Ponzi or Bitcoin would never work. They're all starting to pivot. They're all starting to accept it because Bitcoin has this way of if you cannot destroy it, which you can't, we know it's super decentralized. It's, you know, it has no central point of control where they can go and lean on and actually exert influence. If you cannot kill it, you have to join it. It just has this game theoretics where if you can't kill it, you have to join it. So I think we're seeing that happen at the Wall Street level now, where all of these, gold bugs tried to meme this, tried to get people to say fiat currency for decades, and nobody cared, nobody would. Bitcoin shows up on the scene, and suddenly fiat currency is a buzzword. Everyone says it, everyone uses that term, everyone knows what it means now.
Now we have what's around 200 publicly traded companies around the world that did the same thing that Seyr does, not the same thing, but like also buying Bitcoin. And now I think 2025 might be just the beginning of the same thing with nation states saying like, hey, we also want to be sovereign. If everyone
Yeah.
is moving to this Bitcoin state, like we don't want to be holding like worthless fiat things. And we knew about gold, but gold is kind of old, so we want to have some Bitcoin, and I think that's just happening slowly. And I think we will look back in 5-10 years and saying like, oh wow, that went quick, like that was really fast. But we are seeing like the slow first movers already coming in.
Yeah, 100%, man. I mean, you think it just like if you look at how fast Bitcoin's moved over the past 5 to 10 years, and you know, when all of these things are really exponentials, whether you're talking about the compounding interest or kind of Moore's law or Metcalfe's law of network adoption, we're really at the beginning of all of those stacks. I mean, it's really less than 5% of people, so the vast majority of individuals is still to come. When you look at corporations, it's only a small percentage of actual corporations. And at this point, it's kind of this weird niche Bitcoin treasury company that they understood it first, and they're leverage buying it, and they're taking advantage of this ephemeral moment where suddenly kind of everyone's suddenly realizing, just like the this awakening to the debasement trade. As soon as you see the debasement trade, you're like, okay, well, what does debasement mean? Anyone goes and Googles it, and they're like, oh shit, they're debasing the money supply at 8% a year globally. It was like, well, half of my portfolio is sitting in bonds that maybe yield 4%. So I think what Saylor saw, like before anyone else saw it, I think initially he was like, hey, my cash is a melting ice cube. I need to protect it. And then he's like, well, if my cash is a melting ice cube, what else is melting ice cubes out there? That led him to kind of like look at this fixed income market, which is 300 trillion plus dollars worldwide. That is all negative yielding dead money. Because I mean, at the top end of that, if you're yielding 4.5% and they're debasing the currency at 8%, you're negative yielding, about 3.5%.
Thank you for watching this video. This was only a snippet of the podcast. And if you want to watch the full episode and get all of the context of this episode, you can click right here or here. Oh, maybe also here.